host Martinez, and we're going to talk a little bit about DJing, history of maybe music, musicology, perhaps some tech stuff, depending on if we want to get into that. So when was the last time you played a show?
Ooh. Gosh, that's a good question. Man,
Get you off guard there.
I know, you like stumped me like right off the get. It actually might have been that Riverfront thing, actually.
Yeah, so that was like what, two weeks ago?
Yeah, it's been like couple weeks.
Yeah.
I know there's going to be another event like next weekend, sort of a similar type thing, a little camp out.
Same area, or?
It's actually right here in like Snohomish.
Okay.
So
okay.
they don't have the full details yet, but I'm gonna go check that out, and that should be a fun little show.
Yeah, you brought your. You said you don't have a sub for it yet, or no, you do have a subwoofer for your PA system.
Yeah, I have like
out to that one.
Yeah, I got the full. Yeah, we didn't need that. I guess Carlos said he already had sound for all that, so I didn't have to bring anything extra for that. Just the tops.
Just the yeah.
So
well, those were definitely filling up that river space really nicely, and it was cool seeing like how the lights were against the trees and the river. Really beautiful night.
yeah, it totally reminds me of some old school like throwbacks. Like you go out in the middle of nowhere,
Right.
and it was almost there. Totally. But I mean, you got like the generators, and there's just nobody around, and like yeah.
And that was something else, having the gas power generators, just long ass cords, tent, everything set up.
I'm pretty excited about what that might be. Like next year.
Yeah, no, that's why I wish I took a little bit more footage. I was thinking of just getting some of y'all's music together and then like making like a little promo video and then doing some logistical planning with you guys and
Yeah, I think I actually have some footage you could. I don't know how good the lighting was, but yeah, I got
either way.
I got like 5+ minutes or something. I think I got some stuff from PJ.
That'd be great. Yeah, if you send it to me after this or something like that.
Sure.
Put it together, get some little promotional, get some people out there, have some barbecue, picked up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that was like the most recent time that you played.
Yeah.
Besides just 10 minutes ago.
I know, right? Just back in here.
Super nice though. You have a very nice setup that you put up yourself, right? You constructed it.
Yep. Yeah, it took about a week or so to build out like the frame, and then sort of slowly finish the rest over a couple of months.
That's quite a project.
So yeah, been saying I was gonna do it for years, and finally went, hey, I got like the right power tools. I kind of like measured it out, and bam, just went.
DeWalt or.
Yeah, just some saws and a ruler. I'm like, people are like, man, where did you get like the design? I'm like, well, I kind of had it sort of roughly in my head, and it's like I know how to use a ruler. And actually, I kind of laid the gear out on the ground and kind of just like, okay, this is exactly how I want it to be spaced out, and like kind of just measured it and put together like a simple little diagram. And
it's super clean. It looks great on the floor there. Is that real wood? Is that like some type of vinyl? Or?
So all the siding is actually the engineered flooring. So I got that from an idea like when we did some remodeling in the house. Somebody had suggested that for like wood paneling. That's a sort of a newer thing.
Okay.
So that worked out. Makes it a little bit heavy.
Wood, then.
So it's not exactly. I think it's like vinyl. It's like they call it engineered wood.
Oh, okay.
So
engineered wood.
Yeah, I'm not that versed.
No, it's okay.
But then the top actually we just took. It's actually a vinyl wrap. So it's an adhesive vinyl. Okay, so it's all like a wood frame, and you just basically had this big, huge roll of black vinyl where it's just like a sticker, and you peel the back off, and you just pull it over it taut, and then you just kind of cut out the holes and tuck it in and fold it all down, and you put like a little heat gun on it, and the adhesive just kind of bonds to it.
Wraps around whatever the surface is, and then you have your turntables up there, and
so did a couple 1200s, and then the XDJs.
That's the little
So those are the pioneers, but they're unlike the CDJs. There's no CD; they're fully digital.
Yeah. Okay. I've been seeing a lot of those. Very nice looking. Like it's not really GUI, but the interface.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. Yeah, a lot of people have been doing all the controllers, and I had that for all, but I had this old mixer, and I really wanted it back because it's the rotary knob. So that's a Vestax PMC 50.
That's one of the tables you have there?
Oh, that's the mixer.
Oh, yeah. You said mixer, of course.
But yeah, so it has like, the full rotary knobs. That thing's like over 20 years old. That thing is just so rocking. Yeah, so it has the sliders. I still have them. But for sort of that long progressive mixing, it's so much better with rotary knobs. Like, you know, the old school rotary, and they're nice,
very
big,
smooth.
Yeah, it's very smooth, and they're nice and big, and so it just feels really nice.
Yeah.
You know,
Tactile wise.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, that's awesome.
I couldn't believe it. You know, that thing is what Vestax has been defunct now for 4 or 5 years, and I thought, I was kind of curious. I'm like, how much would this thing actually sell for? And you go out on like eBay, and it's still like over two grand for a mixer that's 20 years old.
I mean, I can imagine, like, the classics have that tendency to come back, especially nice, like, music equipment. There's some, I can't remember the exact speakers, but there's this, like, they're supposed to, they're not high quality like that. They're like the NS speakers, I think, and they're just, like, known for their kind of crappy quality, but if you could mix it and it sounded nice to them, you knew it would pretty much sound nice on any system. NS10s, I think, or something like that. I don't know if that's right, but like old, I think it was Yamaha NS10s, if that's right. But yeah, I mean, I think they probably are more expensive now just because people are like, I need to get some of those classic NS10s, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So you also host parties here too, right?
Yeah, occasionally, yeah. Usually a couple times a year, and it's usually, you know, just a lot of local people from the scene, or just people who are just into the music, you know, do a little barbecue, do a little music, and, you know, it's pretty low key in terms of, you know, not really trying to have like some rager in your backyard, but, you know, it's people who come in and, you know, usually end up having, you know, 5-6 plus DJs and just kind of rotate it every couple hours, and you just
kind
go
of
all day.
Thing.
Yeah.
That was dope, and that's a great idea. I saw your little sign that said super chill, like up in there. Yeah.
Oh
I don't know if it's yours, but
yeah.
No, definitely. Especially just, you know, if you crank it up all the time. I know some people that just go almost all week just partying. It's like, I don't know how you do that without burning out. It's impossible.
I remember the people trying to do that those days, and back in my early 20s, it was like, what's happening tonight?
Every night. Yeah.
Every night. It was like, you're like, you couldn't wait to get off of work, and what's the next thing going? Now it's like, now I got to go to bed early because I got to get up and go to work tomorrow, and
the
grind.
So you work in tech then, right?
Yeah, work in tech, and so I guess I kind of always go hand in hand. I guess that's my connection still. Is, you put the headphones on and disappear in the music while you work.
I bet that's pretty chill. What do you usually listen to when you're grinding away at work?
So mostly I got turned on to digitally imported radio, DI, DI.FM. They're now one of the oldest, longest running electronic music what do you call it? Like radio stations. It's not really. Yeah. It's actually a sort of an amalgamation of radio stations. They play mixes and tracks from all over the world that people send in. So literally every possible genre you can ever think of.
Radio sort of style?
Older and way more. So one of the things I really love is they do mixes, right? So if you've ever tried to do electronic music on Pandora or Spotify or some of these, they just grab like random
song,
but random, and sometimes they yank it right out of mixes, and that's just absolutely horrible. It's this horrible transition.
Yeah.
This is like
train wreck sound.
So imagine having like entire radio shows or mixes as the playlist, right? So things are actually not like, in terms of like rotating around, happen maybe every hour or two.
And then there's clean fades, kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, well, so they'll do like your classic. They'll do like they're doing a mix, and then they'll do sort of like a classic radio station, right? You're gonna like, hey, here's like a little break, and we're transitioning to the next show or whatever the case is. So yeah, I'm mostly listening to the tech house station because I'm a tech house guy.
Nice.
But it depends, my mentor was actually a drum and bass DJ. That was way back, and he's been collecting records since like '92, and I had a lot of inspiration from that. He always told me that I'm a record collector first and a DJ second.
Okay.
So I guess I always followed that. So always had drum and bass always had a special place in my heart. And I'll wake up in the morning and just do like a little liquid drum and bass. That's my have my coffee, and that's what I start with.
Nice.
And then it's like in the afternoon. Okay, now we're gonna switch over
to tech house.
Yeah, switch over to tech house. Yeah, sometimes some deep house or just some full house. We'll just do some techno, whatever. I don't know.
Okay. Would you mind like expounding on like the differences between those different house sounds?
Sure. So, I mean, so house traditionally is going to be a lot more of like the warmer, soulful type sounds, right?
Okay.
Sort of
like funk, sort of.
So it could be funk, funk and soul, right? So like there's sort of funky, but then there's also soulful. You're gonna have a lot more vocals. You're gonna have a lot more sort of warmer elements, like in the drums and things like that. Where techno is gonna be sort of more of the opposite spectrum. It's gonna be far more industrial. It's gonna be cold metallic sounds. A lot more sort of like minimalistic. Yeah, I mean, it'll vary. I mean, that's sort of like a gross overgeneralization because there's so many like subgenres and all these different like parts of it. But I think that would be like a high level. And then when you get into sort of tech house, it's sort of interesting that you have the sort of infusion of a little bit of both, right? So you might have stuff that's a little bit like stompier. You might have some stuff more with vocals. A lot of techno doesn't have vocals. It can. There's no requirements that it does or doesn't, but it tends to be a little bit more minimalistic in that way.
It's not about the singer.
Yeah, exactly.
Even a singer,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, tech house is going to be a little bit more of that infusion. And I definitely sort of, I had a lot of, coming from California, a lot of sort of roots in house, but I've always been a techno head at heart. And so, sort of my later years of doing music, I've sort of had more of this infusion. And I also kind of like that. Gives me the ability, when you are doing a show, you can kind of feel it out. Like if people really feel like they want to fist pump it, you can kind of grind it. You can grind it a little bit more with those elements. Or if it's sort of a little bit maybe more laid back, or kind of people are just kind of like grooving but not really like fist pumping it, you can kind of go a little bit more housey.
Okay.
So always dig that. But yeah, my earlier days, man, I was just grinding away on techno. I always found that kind of a little bit hard on the West Coast.
Really?
I just never found like techno to be as prolific or as loved on the West Coast as say like the East Coast. I don't know if that's just.
I've heard that.
I don't know if it's just because like it was closer to going across the pond. I mean certainly places like L.A. probably had some stuff, but going down in the Bay, like it existed, but it was more pockets. Bay Area is definitely like very housey. People think of like DJ Dan and a bunch of all those guys that were sort of blowing up like the house scene. And
is that like 70s, 80s, or is that?
That would be like 90s, like 2000s.
Yeah, because I mean there wasn't really the DJ genre didn't start until like the late 80s, right? Like I mean like being like there was disc jockeys, but there wasn't like someone who's actually like. Yeah,
there's definitely that rise and that transition, and obviously there's a lot of influence from like disco, but there's also like tons of influence from like hip hop as well, in those roots of like the rise of DJs, the rise of
and that started in the 70s. Hip hop was, I mean, it's been around almost 40 years now, I think.
Yeah, a lot of those, late 70s, early 80s, and the technology wasn't always there to like make it. So a lot of cheaper ways to do it was to go scouring for records, and so people would take little sound bites and mix it. And that was a lot of like the early DJ stuff, especially like in hip hop, and a lot of that I think carried over into sort of the electronic realm. And as the technology got better, I think you started to see that fan out more, where you started getting into some of those crossovers like Africa Bambaataa and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? Because it depends on who you ask, right? So a lot of people think of him as like sort of like an old hip hop god, but many of his tracks also had a very strong influence like into the electronic community.
Yeah.
And then you had other guys who were really trying to push the envelope with like technology way back then when it was so rough. Guys like Kraftwerk and stuff like that.
Not familiar actually with that.
So my classic that I always flash back to is watching the movie Breakin' in the '80s, which was like all about breakdancing. And
I haven't seen that one. I saw Beat Street.
Beat Street was awesome. Also, so Breakin', I think, if I remember correctly, was actually before Beat Street. It was probably a little bit more light. Beat Street was probably a little more sort of gritty. But yeah, and the classic scene that everyone remembers from Breakin' is where he's like, breakdancing, where it looks like he's holding the broom, and like it's like he's doing the full move and not actually touching the broom, but the broom is actually like moving with his hand and all that. course, it was like some really cheap effects, but the interesting part is that the song in that scene is actually Kraftwerk, Tour de France, and it's not even on the soundtrack, which is hilarious. So
it's not on the soundtrack.
It's not even on the
so you buy
soundtrack.
the soundtrack.
So
It's
not even on the soundtrack. Yeah. So I remember there was like years people like, what was that song? Like
or it's not in the list. Or
it's not even on the list.
Wow.
It's not even on the list. But it's a classic, and it's a gem, and it's
Tour de France is the name.
Yeah, Tour de France.
Kraftwerk.
Kraftwerk. Yep. That's an old school one. In fact, a lot of people don't even realize that the words in it's all in French.
Oh really?
Yeah.
How's that spelled? Kraftwerk.
With a K.
Okay.
So they were like a German group, if I remember correctly.
Interesting. And then they have this song Tour de France that's like all in French.
Yeah.
That's cool. I mean, Europe is just such a nest of different places. Everything's so close.
Well, and I always found that interesting, right? I mean, sort of like techno came, the true techno, because people say techno music, like what does that really mean? Or really what they mean is electronic music.
Yeah.
So techno is such a specific subgenre. But, it really started sort of in Detroit and Chicago and New York. Yeah. And it was kind of, I guess, before its time, because then you saw it like not be really big in the U.S. and you see it just transfer and explode in Europe.
So it started in Detroit. Electronic music or just like techno?
Techno really specifically, right?
Okay. And then it migrated across the
pond. Migrated, and I mean, you had so many different explosions of different like subgenres.
Deep house. Well, those are newer ones, right?
Deep house. I mean, you see some stuff like the resurgence. So stuff like acid house is having a little bit of resurgence. But acid house was probably one of the first big sort of split out like really distinct subgenres. Okay. And so that really came about from the use of old 303s. So the 303, the Roland 303 was actually designed to be a drum machine, and it just sucked. It was crap.
Terrible sound.
It was terrible. But as struggling artists, you could go find one in a garage sale for like $20 or something, right?
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things, you could go in there, tweak it, and you make these really sort of like crunchy, like high pitch sounds, right? All that like sort of really crunchy, gritty sounds you hear now. Yeah, exactly. Or those high pitch, like all those sounds, right? So
sine waves, square waves.
And I assume there's some. I don't know how they came up with the name. I'm sure it has something to actually. Some effect that it had on actually being on acid, but yeah, I mean, whoa. But yeah, that definitely sort of then became sort of acid house and that acid sound.
That's pretty crazy. So so acid house has to do with the 303 Roland and accessibility to like.
I mean, that's sort of the like. So people were looking for like, hey, how do I push the envelope? How do I get like instruments and stuff to do that? And they're some of these things are super expensive even today, right? I mean, you're still thousands of dollars to go buy new ones.
Yeah,
so
especially the high end stuff.
So when you could, and I've always found that so. I think that's been a strong appeal and interest to electronic music in general, is that the barriers to entry have been removed on so many different ways. The way you define art or how artists actually go in and do it, like you don't have to have like a $20,000 studio to go do it. You don't even have to have a $2,000 instrument. Like you can make stuff with $20.
Yeah.
Or even free now with the computer stuff now. I mean, you can do stuff. If you have an idea, you can do it. And I think it's also interesting. Like it sort of redefines like what artistry and what talent actually is, because the skill. The physical skill dimension has been transcended a little bit. So you think about like if you play a guitar, like if you're in a band and you play a guitar, right? There's the actual skill of playing a guitar, and then there's the artistry of like making music with the guitar, right?
Mm-hmm. Scales versus.
I would equate it. So if I did a comparison of like a painter, right? If I can draw a portrait of you. Or are painting of you, is that skill or is that art? right? So there's a fine line between, right?
Yeah.
So art sort of imitates
like
life.
to make something that looks real.
So there can be people that are very skilled at doing something. I could be very skilled at drawing a portrait of you. I could be skilled at actually playing a guitar. Does that mean that I'm an artist? Well, I mean, it's somewhat subjective, but if all I do is ever play covers, like even if I do them well, does that make me an artist?
Or does it just make you kind of
like I'm skilled at playing a guitar, right, or whatever the case might be? And so I think that's interesting in the electronic scene, because there's both, but suddenly now it's a little bit easier. Like if you are not skilled, right? So there are plenty of artists who are maybe not skilled at playing a guitar, but you have that idea in your head,
creativity,
right? You have the sounds, right? So it's easier to get that out of your head than it was in the past, and certainly than it might be in maybe some other musical avenue.
No, I think that's very true. I mean, that distinction you're making there, I haven't thought about it in exactly that way, but just the fact that you have people that have maybe creativity, but because of some paywall they couldn't get lessons, or they didn't have time to practice, whatever it is. But now with computers, electronics, like it's kind of gone in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And then the information is so replete. There's stuff all over YouTube.
Oh,
blogs everywhere. I mean, some of it's crap, but there's a bunch of really great stuff out there, and you just access it. If you have internet connection, you have a router. You're
absolutely.
Golden,
Absolutely. And I think you're seeing more. Yeah, you see more and more of that. Now with people learning that way, sharing it out there, and people not even really caring. Like, what is this gonna like? I'm not out there even trying to make money. Like, I get some music and I put it out there, and like. Yeah, maybe I just wanted to share it. Yeah, maybe it's successful.
And that's so amazing too, because you have like people that are hosting. The way that advertising works now, it's so different. You have these servers that are just they're basically free. There's like paywalls to get better service for it, and that's part of the revenue, and part of it's ads sometimes. And that's it's definitely changed the way that people put their music out there. You have SoundCloud, or you have. I mean, I think even Pandora. I don't know if it costs to get on there. I haven't even looked into that, but
I don't know how they do that, but it definitely, you see like the change in industry. I know, like it used to be when you're still trying to do like vinyl, you would maybe make $500 would probably be good. That you put out like an EP. There was just so much involved with like trying to get those out. Like it was really expensive for everybody, right? It's expensive for the artists. It's expensive for like the record companies, and like how do you get it out there? And people are taking risks, and financially, right?
Time.
I mean, record companies have come and gone so many times, and then you'd see people try to do acetate or some other way to like press their own vinyl, and you do that. But now that everything is like so digital, you sort of see comebacks. You see like the rise of things like Beatport and. Track Source, I think, is one, and like a couple of there's a few of them out there.
You can sell your stuff. CD Baby.
Yeah, so you're out there. It's easier to sell it, but you could take out so much middleman. I mean, even for me, I sort of had like a hiatus for years. Had a son, and it just was getting too expensive, right? You would go and shop for tracks, and like like I said, everything kind of went over the pond. If you're doing like techno or a lot of stuff that's coming out of like Europe, you're paying like $10 to $12 for a record for one song. Wow, which is insane.
That's pretty high.
So not only is it super expensive, but I mean, like if you ever tried to haul around a record bag, it's super heavy.
Yeah. Big honking thing.
Yeah, it's. Yeah. I mean,
which one?
Yeah.
You have a record bag.
So I still got a record bag. Still got a collection of the old stuff. But yeah, once sort of the advent of digital, then it became feasible again, right? You can buy a track for just a couple of dollars, and you get the one. That was the other thing. It's like, well. There would be limited pressings and availability of tracks. So
because they're physical copies.
Physical copies, yeah, right. So just like there's the cost to even get it out there, there's like the risk of like, well, are they all going to get gobbled up? So I only make so many, right? So you might only a couple hundred pressings, and that's all there ever is. Exactly. So the digital, everything, like your material cost is down, your overhead's down,
so much,
right? And you never have to worry about running out.
Yeah, it's there. It just exists.
Although I have noticed that at least on like places like Beatport, they get, I don't know exactly how they justify that, but I noticed they get a little bit sneaky with like, oh, this just came out, but you'll like it's like they re-release it, but it's like a song that might be like 3 or 4 years old.
Huh.
And it'll be like, oh, because they try to filter it like, you come in and you might have favorite artists or like what was recently released. I'm like,
that is sneaky.
I'm like, I have this track from like 4 years ago. Like, it didn't just come out.
Being disingenuous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dang.
But you won't know, man, there's so much music that comes out. I think that's another thing that's kind of kept me going with it is, the just sheer volume of new stuff that comes out, or whether it's recycled or brand new, like it's just constantly evolving and coming out. And
yeah, I mean, we got like about 8 billion people now, and so much access to the internet, so much access to all these tools. And
well, I remember listening to like what I the commercial music or the top 40. I mean, they'll always have like their place and their costume, but it's like if I'm listening to the radio, I just end up feeling like a gerbil at a feeder pellet, right? You're on there on the wheel and you just keep going and going and going, right? And you would go out to, when I used to do more of like sort of commercial club music and stuff like that in the early days, people were like, play this song. I'm like, man, if you want to hear what's on the radio, just go home and listen to the radio.
On your tunes.
Right? I mean, the whole point to go out is to hear stuff that you've never heard before.
Yeah.
And I remember when sort of Eurobeat and some of that was coming back over like in the 90s, that's what I would get excited about going out to the clubs, because like you could hear stuff like you wouldn't hear on the radio.
Eurobeat.
Yeah, Eurobeat was like more of like, that was like sort of those days like La Bouche and Planet Soul and Culture Beat, like all those. Maybe that's before your time, but
maybe I like
or Two Unlimited. So
techno is like not one that I'm very.
So Two Unlimited. So everybody knows Two Unlimited. So I find that so interesting, because when they really came out, they were really sort of combining techno with sort of some Eurobeat splashed onto it, and then sort of kind of throwing in a little bit of a sort of hip hop style MC. But everybody knows, get ready for, like, so things like Get Ready for This, right?
Oh,
so,
yeah, okay.
So, right? So that was Two Unlimited, and they were huge in Europe. And it's so funny because they started getting big back in the U.S. in, like, late 90s. But they were doing it, like, they were doing it way back in the early 90s.
So, yeah, I mean, and this kind of shows how much you just have to grind just to get that recognition a lot of times.
Well, and it's funny how it like comes back and it sort of became almost like commercial style, when that was like that was sort of like what someone might have considered rave or techno music back in the early 90s.
No one knows about that.
And like then now it's like, oh yeah, this is what we hear at sporting events. Like this is commercial now.
This is what's raised up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting how that happens with styles too, and clothing and everything.
Well, I think it's come back in many different ways. You see this definitely happen a lot with in hip hop. You see the influence of like drum and bass and that sort of some of the other subgenres that came out of that, like dubstep and stuff. You see that sort of working its way back into sort of like different types of hip hop production and stuff like that. They start taking certain elements and certain sounds.
Well, yeah, I mean, Black Eyed Peas, I think they've done a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's been a lot of like sort of give and take and back in there, but in a similar way, right? I mean, a lot of that went into the drum and bass as a whole went into there. I mean, a lot of that stuff started by taking old break beats and stuff like that and just playing them faster than normal.
Just like at like twice speed, or like not even that, just like.
So, I don't know exactly how all of them were done in the early days, but certainly, like, if you take, something that was done meant for 33 and third, RPM and put it on 45, you're gonna...
It's gonna be way different. And it's gonna be a different pitch, too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, which is really cool, because people are like, I feel like I know this song, but something's different.
But, yeah, a lot of that stuff was, that's how you would do that. Again, either the technology wasn't available or it was too expensive. I've never actually fact-checked it, but I've even heard that when the Beastie Boys did Paul Revere, right? So a lot of people remember that because it's backwards, right? Like it actually the bass line's actually backwards. It's like boom, 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 boom.
Oh,
boom,
yeah,
boom.
Okay.
So I've heard what they actually did to do that. Because you could people have figured out how to actually reverse the polarity of the magnet on a turntable now, but what I heard they did is actually take a roll of duct tape and they mounted the needle upside down and put it on there and played it. So that actually results in it playing backwards. So instead of putting the needle on top, you put it upside down, and then they would put a roll of duct tape underneath it, right? And then so now the needle's pushing from on the bottom and going around. And that's actually how they originally did it.
That's crazy.
I don't know if that's actually true or not, but it totally makes sense. Like, it would work.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because it's still spinning in the same direction, but it's on the reverse side. And then, did they eventually make it so...
Oh, I'm sure that's probably how they got the idea. I'm sure they went to a studio, but I don't know. I never actually fact-checked that, but I'm like, it totally makes sense.
It's a cool story.
Either way, it was a cool story. Like, totally makes sense.
How did they accomplish breakbeating with vinyls, like, back in the day?
I mean, so you would get... A lot of the start, like, again, like in hip hop, they would take little samples from, like, drum samples, and then you would just put it in there, right? It would be like a breakdown and stuff. So a lot of it was a combination of just what was available on drum machines and taking like different pieces from snippets from different other pieces of vinyl.
How did you get the snippet though?
So they would get it from like a piece of vinyl. So they'd find these obscure things. And I always found that so interesting as a throwback, especially in electronic music, is that used to be, and that's still I think true today, which has its root in hip hop, right? A lot of it was you wanted to find like this crazy random obscure thing, and you would literally just go like record diving, and you'd spend hours to find like this one tiny little sample, right?
3 seconds.
And I mean, we're talking like you would find like a piece of vinyl with a sample from like 1937, like just some random thing, right?
Classical orchestration,
right?
Whatever it is.
I mean, I've heard people use samples from like Night of the Living Dead and stuff like that,
really?
right?
It's
It's like super awesome, right?
Yeah.
And they'll use like the vocal sample, or they'll get ideas from it, right? They'll get ideas for synth or for strings. Guys who have the equipment or know how to do it will do actually go and sort of replay that part of it, and then maybe take the sample. I've heard a breakbeat that did that. I forgot the name of that track, but man, it was so awesome. Yeah, they took like Night of the Living Dead.
I love that. The black and white one, right?
Yeah.
Is that 37? Is that one?
No, I don't know when. No, I don't think it's that old. But I mean, I'm just throwing out old. But that's a lot of these obscure things, and they were just gems, right? You would find it, and people would gravitate to it, and it was awesome because, especially in those days, like it made you unique because. Nobody, like, if you found this gem, like, nobody even knows what it is, let alone, like, try to go find it. And you found it in, like, this random pile of hundreds and hundreds of records. And so, yeah, some people have done a whole bunch of that. Actually, I know DJ, so I'm right from Sacramento, which is not too far from Davis. A lot of people know UC Davis, which is actually where DJ Shadow is from.
DJ Shadow, yeah.
So, and I've actually been to some of the record stores that he used to go, diving in and pull obscure stuff out of,
which is really cool, like Eastern sounding stuff.
Yeah, some very like just crazy experimental, type stuff. Or even going, if you ever go out to like, Amoeba in San Francisco, I mean, just this huge warehouse of just endless piles of records.
Physical vinyl.
Just physical vinyl, and just going out and then finding like those little gems for that one little sample. I mean, that's really when we think about breakbeats and drum and bass, where people talk about like the Amen from the Allman Brothers. A lot of that was like stuff that they did, right? So much stuff they did. They never really got. I mean, they get the recognition. But it's not like they made like millions, but you can't really do breaks or any type of like drum and bass or anything like that without having like Allman
Brothers.
Yeah, the Allman Brothers, man, they did it.
That's similar to Motown, isn't it? I like their style.
Yeah, There's I don't know the relationship there, but
how do they? Okay, so when you're getting the breakbeat, would they physically spin back the record each time, or would they like?
So
during a performance.
So most of that was not going to be from the vinyl itself. It would be whatever was recorded. So people did it different ways. You could do it with a drum machine. You could physically play the drums and record it. Like some people would do that. I think that's a lot of what like the Allman Brothers were actually doing was physically playing like little drum snippets and recording it.
And then they just put it into the MPC
or whatever. Right? Yeah, you put it onto like a piece of vinyl or whatever. Right.
Would they ever like try to record harmonics like the orchestral parts or like?
Oh yeah, so you I don't know if they specifically did, but many people have done that, right? You can get instrumentals. Those were used to be big gyms in the vinyl days. You'd have instrumentals or acapellas and throw it in. I remember one of my mentors. We were in sort of like commercial record pools, but when he would go out and he would do drum and bass shows back in like the late '90s and throw something on, and then have like some hip hop acapella on it. I remember one time I don't even remember what he was playing, but he dropped like Ice Cube acapella, We Be Clubbing over it. It was awesome. Yeah, but it's like We Be Clubbing with the whole drum and bass going and then putting it over, and there was a lot of that type of creativity. Yeah, there was a lot of creativity that you could do with that type of stuff back in the day. And then some of it, you could mess with pitch or slow it down. I remember when dubstep wasn't really a genre. That was just like a breakdown in a drum and bass track.
What is dubstep compared to?
It's mostly just it's really like sort of born out of a lot of the same elements as drum and bass, but slower. So I don't know, the way I always sort of try to describe like drum and bass is you have like these really fast sort of like snares and things like that, like 160 to 180 BPM, really fast, but then it's really slow bass lines, right? So the bass lines are still like hip hop speed. They're like about 80, so it's like half the speed.
Oh wow.
So people are not that if you watch people dance, a lot of them aren't dancing to basically those snares and those the really fast beat. It's actually the slower bass line, whereas the bass lines are more just right?
Yeah.
Much
hits.
slower.
Yeah, there's not boom, boom, boom.
And they carry, right? Really carry.
Heavy.
Low. Which again is then also has a strong affinity to like how hip hop is, right? Because a lot of hip hop's about 80 BPM.
All that.
Well, the speed wise is about the same, right? It's about 80 BPM or something like that.
It gives it kind of that laid back feel, even though
it's kind of like you're just kind of like rolling with it. Exactly.
That's tight. Which a lot of I think the Supremes played around that. I think that might be Motown.
That's definitely more.
Isley Brothers a little bit different. Solomon Burke definitely different, but still, I don't know why I just love that period of music. Even though they're kind of a little disparate, but.
No, but there's sometimes just throwing that in. I mean, you see some where they'll be done over and over and over again. I mean, like the number of times that like Donna Summer's been like redone, the Disco Queen, she's had so much stuff redone, like
cut up or
whether it's this like either remixed, reusing the vocals or something, like so many times. Aretha Franklin's been thrown in there so many times. So a lot of those things have come back or been reused.
So classic, just so well performed. And so venerated in our society, I think too.
Yeah, there's something to be said, just sort of like throwing that familiarity in every once in a while is always sort of nice too. Like people gravitate to that, I want something new, but then sometimes there's brand new, and then sometimes just recycling something is just kind of cool, like recycling it a new way.
Yeah, just like you said, how hip hop and house and tech seem to do at certain junctures.
Yeah, even in commercial music itself, that happens too sometimes, and sometimes the remake's better than the original.
That's true. Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a cover.
Well, one of my favorite ones I remember doing is Red Red Wine. So everybody remembers UB40. UB40 is not the original artist. No. In fact, it always blows people's mind because it was originally written and performed by Neil Diamond.
Really?
Yeah, and people were like, what? Like, yeah. And it's actually funny because Neil actually really appreciates their edition. He's like, yeah, you guys did it way better than I did.
It has such groove to it. I can't imagine him.
Right? I know, you're like, wait, how does that work? Like, yeah, it's like the popular version is entrenched in your mind. And you're like, yeah, now I'm trying to or there's a couple others. What was the other? I think it's Mad World. Like everybody remembers like REM doing it.
Which is the one that was in Johnny Dark.
Yeah. But the original is actually like Tears for Fear. It was like one of their first big hits.
Is that?
So everybody wants to rule the world and.
Yeah. Like I know the band's.
Yeah, you would know Tears for Fears, but yeah, I mean like so. Actually, I've heard the original. It's actually not bad. But yeah, it's kind of interesting how some of like some covers or remixes and stuff like become way more popular.
Embody it way better. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like having a ghostwriter almost, except not. It's some just bouncing off someone else's lyrical works.
Yeah, sometimes it's probably just also like the zeitgeist. It's like the artist is with whatever like they're it's a younger artist that gravitates a little bit more with the younger crowd versus sort of like an older artist, like maybe it was good but it may not be popular, but I don't know, it just varies.
Less in touch with it because it's not part of their
or maybe it was like it was a good song by the original artist but then only had like one or two good songs, right? Like so they kind of fade to obscurity.
Yeah, that happens. That's crazy though. So like the collection of all your equipment and stuff, how long has that taken? And what was the catalyst for that? What were the reasons that you got into music in this way?
So I guess I was always big into music. My dad was a big music collector, and I guess it started by college. Yeah, or my friends going to college. My sort of, I guess would have been the first year, and we would go out to like these house parties, and yeah, I would just bring like CDs and collecting that, and then pretty soon it kind of turned into like this really crappy DJ. We would say a DJ, but it's really just putting on like different tracks. But it was like all the music that people wanted. We would literally just show up and start taking over places. We would just show up with speakers, everything, man. We had the CD players.
Like, all right,
I had this crappy little mixer, like $20 Radio Shack mixer that I had. And we would show up and they were like, yeah, who do you know? We're like, we know John. Oh yeah, okay, come on in.
This is the most common name.
Yeah, right. Like it's so random, right? And so, started doing that, and then I would do kind of a couple little events here and there, sort of like what I would affectionately now call like sort of mobile jockeys. And I ran into this guy who eventually became like my mentor, and he'd already been spinning records for a long time. And he's like, yeah, man, like you should come, work for this company. And we were doing like weddings and stuff. And that was good money, back in those days.
Good money, yeah.
I didn't have to really do anything. They provided all the music and they provided gear and lighting and all that stuff.
Talent.
Yeah, and so I accumulated some, started making some decent money and thought about I want to get a little bit more serious about it. Like, let's get some turntables and, a buddy, this guy's like, hey, if I'll teach you everything I know about spinning on turntables if you just let me come over and practice.
Is that your mentor?
Yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, so I'm like, all right. And it just kind of went from there. It was definitely hard for me at first. I never played any instruments, so today I still can't read. I can't read a musical score, but I was pretty good at math, so I understood like the math of it, right? So once the math sort of was broken down to me, especially electronic music, it's not super complicated trying to work out the math.
Yeah. Beats and.
Yeah. So just how it's constructed, right? Like the counts and all this stuff. Then it took me probably about a year before I could get into really beat matching and getting into programming, and then the rest was just practice after that. And today, that skill has been sort of subverted by technology because the technology can beat match for you.
Yeah. Which it might be deprecated, but at the same time, it's not. You can't beat the analog sound. I mean, maybe at some point with AI, but.
I mean, there's people say about the sound and all this. Me personally, I don't have super strong feelings about that in terms of sound, other than sort of the nostalgia for sure.
I guess like the tension of like, are you going to be able to make it? Whereas like, with the digital things, it's going to do it.
Oh yeah, there's definitely the stress. I kind of look at it as like, well, it gave me, you have more time to think about other ways to be creative other than like stressing on like trying to, beat match. But there's so many other things, right? Like programming, I think is like a lost art. I've met so many of these younger guys, and they have no idea what like a transition is to take people on a journey, right? Like
so you're talking about automation.
No, I mean so just programming in the sense of like how you lay tracks out, right? So it's a very generic term, right? We might talk about television programming, right? So in music programming, right? It's your flow, it's your set, right?
Okay.
And like so you want it to be like an ebb and flow. Like some guys play like really flat, which is like sort of, it's just this constant thing. There's other guys, even though, things are on beat, it just sounds like a train wreck, right? It's such a knee jerk from like one to the other.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so that's really like the program, right? And it should, you kind of want it to be like an ebb and flow, right? You don't want to wear people out, but you also don't want to bore them either, right? So you want something like you're going to sort of build it up and take it down. Peaks and valleys. And it can be a challenge. I mean, I know I've had people claim that speeding up or slowing it down. I'm like, nope, I know exactly what to play. I played exactly the same speed the whole time.
Yeah.
And that intensity comes from the way that, again, the programming of elements, right? Sometimes you build it up, and there are certain sounds that are just more intense sounding, right?
Yeah, and also, I mean, even without changing the BPM, you can still half time
exactly,
and then double time in that BPM, right?
Exactly. And that's exactly sort of how you get like that intensity, or you break it down and give people a break. And there are some guys who just don't get that. They really are speeding it up or slowing it down or taking these sort of knee-jerk stuff, and dancers don't like that.
Weird, yeah, because like if you're dancing, you want to stay consistent, especially a dancer, because
exactly.
1 to 8 you count.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do that.
So it'll mess up their flow. So yeah, I think that's still like a lost art, and I spent years trying to do that. I mean, that was the one thing. You always find me up in the front looking at what other DJs are doing, because I wanted to learn from them, or learn either what to do or maybe learn what not to do.
Seeing them just fuck up. Do you remember the trend that happened like in the early 2000s where there was like the annoying ass horn sound people would play when they
God, yeah.
And I didn't know it was happening at first because I wasn't that adept at like the art, and then someone was like, that's what they're doing when they're fucking up, and I'm like, okay, and I listened and I was like, wow. Not only does it sound terrible because you're like, what's going on with the music, but it's like, can't you just plan ahead enough not to fuck up?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. So did that and sort of entered like local club scenes. And back then it was mostly just, it was still basically like top 40 commercial stuff. And then eventually I sort of drug along to my first rave, when that was back in the...
It's like underground.
Yeah, that was probably like 97. Yeah, this was stuff like taking over, going in like cabinet shops and going in some industrial district and like taking something over.
Sick.
Yeah, man, those were the heydays, and that's where it was like there was like just this whole other world I didn't even know about, right? I mean, I was already starting to go into clubs and I'd hear other guys play sort of some of the stuff from like Europe, but I had like really no idea, and then that just blew my mind.
All these other genres that weren't getting enough light because they're kind of being overshadowed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first real taste of like underground sound and where I really wanted to go is my older stepbrother went into the army and he brought back like a CD from Carl Cox, and man, I was just like hooked since then. I mean,
was he like a techno?
Oh, I mean, Carl Cox is like still today, man. He's like a grandfather of them all, man. He's still doing it. I mean, he's like 60 now.
That's
still.
I mean, that's not even that old though. Like, I
guess in this scene, yeah. I mean, in this scene, it's getting up there. There aren't too many guys that are that age that are still doing it, but yeah. And man, I've been fortunate enough to actually meet him a couple times, and super cool guy. And I think that was another thing that really continues to like attract me to scene is like the artists are so accessible, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't go to like a Nirvana show or a Pearl Jam show or really pretty much any other genre and like actually meet the art, like get even within a few feet and then be like, hey man, how's it going? Like, nice to meet you. It was a great set. Like that the ability to do that and sort of like the humbleness of most artists, not all. I definitely met some jerks in my time.
I'm sure, yeah.
Or think there's some kind of think that they're bigger than they are, but there definitely have been so many that I've met. Donald Glaude I've known for years. Locally here in Seattle.
I didn't know that it was so accessible like that. I mean, that's really cool. And it does feed to the whole like campfire tribal vibe that I get from that kind of music. The
exactly,
beating, moving. Yeah.
Exactly. And then after that, it was just I met other people, other DJs, and just stayed in the scene basically since then. Ended up having a kid in my early 20s, and that definitely dialed things back a bit. When it started getting too expensive, then that kind of hung up the headphones for a while, but I was still itching for it.
Still listening to a lot of music.
Never stopped listening. But yeah, once it got kind of expensive, I went on hiatus for a while, and then I'm like, you know what? I can't give it up. So I came back and continued doing it again, and then first and foremost, like I said, I guess that was impressed upon me is I'm a record collector first, right? Collect music first and DJ second. So
you connoisseur of the music.
Yeah, a lot of playing and doing mixes and stuff. I'll do it for myself first, right? I mean, I'll do plenty of my own mixes and
love it, right?
Exactly.
You can't just be like, I'm just gonna do this, make a lot of money, get all the attention.
There are some guys that do that. Like they want to be superstar DJs or they just want like attention. There's more to it than To me, it was always wanting to share, not put myself, I guess, at center stage. I love doing it, but it was more about I want to share the music, share stuff you haven't heard before, as opposed to look at me, on the stage. I'm the guy. Yeah, no. But there are those guys.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of a Napoleon complex or something. Who knows? That's kind of an overused term, I guess. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's that in music all over, any genre, I think.
Oh, for sure.
It's cool to know that techno or electronic music has a more tight-knit community than other ones, though. It's not something I didn't know. Yeah,
across DJs or just people in the scene, definitely. I'd say by and large that still holds true.
So you're a Star Wars fan, huh?
Oh, Star Wars, but this is actually Yoda with headphones, so.
Oh, that's tight. You're the DJ.
Yeah, Yoda. Exactly, right? So, do or do not, there is no try.
Oh, shit.
You gotta use the Force.
Actually from the
film? Yeah.
Do or do not try. Wow, I don't even know. Is that on the moon?
That was in the second one.
Okay.
That where he goes.
I need to watch the classics again.
You gotta watch the classics for sure.
I like some of the CGI stuff, but it's been a minute.
Oh, all right. I think I drank too much coffee. I gotta hit pause for a second.
Oh, you want to go back?
Yeah. Sorry.
No worries.
I drank 2 of those.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, all right. I really like that Starry Night, that thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's Van Gogh, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Is that I guess
it's a replica for sure. Oh yeah. My wife likes all the art. She's got a couple of Monets and Van Gogh and then just randomness.
That's always good. Yeah, you got quite a snazzy place here.
Yeah, it's getting there.
Yeah, piece by piece.
Yeah. Yeah, this was they consider it a basement, or was it a partial basement?
Well, definitely, it doesn't look like... I mean, it's clearly a basement, but it's very nice. The paint, everything here, and massive setup. And you have a sub over there, right?
Yep.
That's sick. What
and that works pretty well back in that little corner there because it's all concrete. Because it's like the partial basement. So basically this white foundation there, it's all part of the foundation. Or so the white base.
Okay, so it doesn't have a lot of vibrations.
Exactly. So it's not vibrating, and it just you get the nice. It acts like a bandpass.
Okay. Yeah, and
because it's gonna basically come right back. It's just right off the wall and comes back.
Oh, okay, yeah, I got you now. Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess you kind of have some nice sub bass trap sort of going on with the couches and stuff.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of clapback like that. There's a little bit, but it's minimal and it's a nice space for it. And then that DJ setup, pretty dope. So you're saying that you started doing the workout plan with not necessarily those, but like just different things too.
Yeah, just trying to stay like active, you know.
Oh yeah. Well, especially working on a computer probably all day. Right?
Yeah, you're like sitting there. I'm like, all right, you gotta stay, keep active.
What's a typical day for someone?
Oh man, I don't know. I guess it varies. The only thing I guess that makes people envious, I haven't set my alarm probably in close to 10 plus years.
Oh, nice.
So
very variable hours, kind of like you could maybe do remote desktop kind of work.
Yeah, it's it's a double-edged sword, right? Like, yeah, you can work whenever you want, but then you can work whenever you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's usually like, yeah, I wake up whenever I wake up, and it generally is probably like 7 something, and stumble out, get my coffee, you know, read the email. Well, that's the other thing too, is like, you know, you learn some lessons, you know. Email can just be an albatross around your neck, and if you start replying, people start thinking like, "Oh yeah, you're available." No, I'm not available. Let me burn through this list, have my coffee, actually get some work done, and then like, okay, now I'm ready to deal with people.
You ever think about writing a script that like would make it so you could do all the drafts and then click a button and there's like a macro or something?
Yeah, just send all of them out. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just sort of like burn it. Like once it's there, I'm like, oh, I feel like I have to just burn it all down. Just delete. Okay, reply. Okay, I'm done.
I've been unsubbing so many, like even things that I found useful. I was like, yeah, fuck this. Like I can't. It's almost every day or every week or even every month. It's like, no, I just can't get all these things. I'm not gonna be able to read through everything.
Yeah, you're just flooded with like all this information. It's information overload. I don't need all this crap.
Yeah, for real. And I mean, what's great is that SMTP now, you know, mail servers have a little bit of machine learning to sort junk and stuff like that, sort of. And then they use keywords, don't they? Or...
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of different stuff they can do there. It'd be really interesting to know like what the metrics are on for like conversions where people are actually you're getting like this effectively spam for some mailing list you didn't even realize you signed up for, and like, you know, you're getting it like from Nordstrom's or something because you have bought something there with a credit card. You're like,
you didn't uncheck the box or whatever, you know.
Yeah, it's like
a little fine print.
I mean, they spent some amount of money on a marketing person or something to like actually compile this thing and build a list and actually mail it out to you. Like what is the conversion rate on that?
Oh,
like,
you mean like what's the loss basically?
Or what? Like how many times does somebody actually read that and click a link, go somewhere, and actually buy something?
Because it must work if big companies do continue, and it seems like it's very pervasive. Like I get it from all companies, so pretty much like until I've unsubbed them.
Yeah, so I don't know how they really measure that and how effective actually is it. Don't know. I mean, I think we're reaching a point where maybe it's not really required because you don't see companies like Amazon doesn't do that. They don't need to send you ads.
Yeah,
they don't really send you anything.
It's colloquial, like people know about Amazon. So,
but all the other big names, I mean, you could arguably say the same thing, but I guess it's because, you know, in many aspects, Amazon's more almost like giant consignment or something, you know, almost basically like what a Walmart is, because Walmart works on a similar type model.
Really?
I mean, whereas, yeah, most of the stuff in Walmart it's basically like consignment, right? It's like some other company is, you know, placing the product in store. So this is why they invested so much. There at one point, I think they may have abandoned now. They had invested a huge amount in RFID so they could track, you know, like the level of product on shelves, so that they could immediately send signals to like their partners, like, hey, your product's getting low, you got to send more in.
And put it there. Smart. Was that a Walmart?
Yeah, Walmart. They put a ton of money into that, and
the RFID is probably expensive.
Yeah, it was a lot of like all the infrastructure they do. The actual like the physical materials are pretty cheap. I mean, like a passive device is like fractions of pennies.
Use the database to just show that, be like, oh, X amount of purchases. This is the stock. Clearly.
I mean, having worked for retail way earlier in my youth, this is a common problem. You can't rely on the computer can say 10, but there might be 3 on the shelf, right? So this is like how do you marry like what's physically on the shelf versus what does the computer say?
Okay.
Plus, these companies also have to do. I'm sure even a Walmart does, right? Most retail does, and does an actual inventory at some point,
for
right?
Prevention and loss. And
exactly, you got to measure loss, right? Because they're going to write it off, and then you have to order more, and so it's a very slow and time-consuming process, right? You have to pay somebody to do that, and it's very slow for them to do that.
So having RFIDs on the packaging could be
exactly right. You just it's basically scanning the product as it's there, and you have a pretty good sense about like what's there or not.
So it's just sending a radio frequency out with the idea of that specific product, and then if it's not in the store, then the signal would be gone because like it's not RFID doesn't go that far.
Yeah, you would disable it. Yeah, you'd either physically pull the tag off at the time of purchase, just like they do like the ink blotting tags, the security tags. Mm-hmm. Or you disable it.
If someone stole it, like for loss.
Yeah, exactly.
Or then it would just as soon as it's like within like 150 feet away, probably it wouldn't send the signal or.
Yeah. So the passive devices actually don't emit a signal at all. In fact, they don't have any batteries at all. They're paper thin. They're like a sticker, and the transmitter actually sends out a signal that is just enough to just enough to energize basically that tag and report back its information, which is very, very small. Very, very small.
That's
so there's no
how many is it bits or bytes?
It's a few bytes. Yeah.
Wow. So it's like 6.
I want to say like it's maybe like I don't know where the technology is now. It's probably like 100, 200, but it's very small. Wow. Because you don't have any power to do anything, right?
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So it's effectively just enough for, you might have something like where you have a transmitter like on the wall, and it will go out and cover like 25 square feet or something like that. And when you get close enough to it, right, it's just enough power to energize the tag, and it reports back its information.
That's pretty amazing.
And they're super cheap. Now then they have what's called an active device, and those are about the size of about a quarter. And those actually do have a battery, right? So they can actually send a signal, but they're much more expensive.
Yeah, it seems like that is kind of a bad idea. I mean, because it seems like the whole benefit of the RFID is the fact that you send it from some centralized point, and then it powers it temporarily just enough to identify it.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly there's trade-offs, either way, right? So you have cheaper tags or more expensive transmitters, or how does that all work? And there's different scenarios. I'm sure there's some scenarios where it just like the passive ones just don't really work.
Do you know why Walmart decided not to go forward?
I think they spent a couple of years doing it. I think they just weren't seeing the ROI that they wanted to. I don't actually really know where it's at today, but I know when it was sort of the cat's meow for a while, and they were definitely a big case study, mostly because they had really doubled down on it and put so much into it.
And they're like, okay, well, we started this. Let's just follow it through.
I mean, you think that even a company like Amazon or something, I don't know exactly how they do it. They may use a somewhat similar approach. I mean, their automation's pretty ridiculous if you've ever seen it.
I haven't. I saw the commercials a couple years ago talking about they're going to do that.
I mean, just seeing how like the robots work and all this.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the store.
No, I mean just like the automation, but it's a real problem trying to figure out like, okay, how much product do we have, where is it, and so forth, and then, it's where everything's digital in an analog world. Like, how do you track these things?
Yeah, no, exactly. When the RFID is definitely a good solution, it seems. Can't think of anything else right now. You have drones walking around looking at everything.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly, spun off other things, right? I mean, that's more or less probably a precursor to NFC, which is, what everybody's now, that was big when we were just sharing info, but that's more or less how you're paying with your phone. That's basically what it's doing is NFC, just which is like the near field communication.
Oh yeah, with the little
Apple Pay or whatever. You pay with your phone. I don't actually know exactly what they do on that, but I'm willing to bet it's still NFC. Because it used to be like that was big. If you want to share your contact info, right? We just put our two phones next to each other.
They don't do that anymore with phones, do they?
I think it just became like a novelty, and like nobody was. I don't know. I actually used to think it was kind of useful, especially if it wasn't like different phone platforms, but it doesn't really seem like people do that.
Well, yeah, it's cool because like you could have more of a security sense because they need to be close, and someone could. It would be harder for someone to hack into you. They'd have to get pretty close, I think.
Yeah.
Depending, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know there's this big deal about people swiping people's credit card information with some devices.
Yeah, with the chip now, I don't know how feasible that really is anymore. If you have to, pretty much now that we've had these huge breaches, pretty much everyone's doing chip now. But the U.S. is one of the last to actually do it. And with the chip, I don't really know how feasible that truly is.
So it has something to do with the magnet, basically?
Yeah, so you could, in a somewhat similar way to how RFID works, yeah. If you with a scanner, if you were close enough, you could, activate and read like the magnetic strip by just being pretty close. You didn't have to actually. You don't necessarily have to physically touch it. But with a
huge security risk.
Yeah, exactly.
Jesus. Well, that's pretty crazy. I don't want to like delve too much into your work if you don't want it. It's something that fascinates me a lot, like tech and computers.
Sure.
But what kind of security precautions do you have to worry about as you're going through? Like if you're using RDP or remote desktop protocols, things like that.
So mostly dealing with stuff where we're trying to help protect customers, because we're trying to set up stuff where you're fanning out to many different machines with some type of credentials, and there's a lot of risk. There's exposure.
They usually have one-factor authentication.
Yeah, they may have one-factor, or if they do have two-factor, how do you enable those type of scenarios and so forth. So supporting a lot of sort of admins like, hey, I need to go roll out this update to 1,000 machines. Okay, well, how do you do that securely?
And that's still, would that be like internal to your clients, like
from their perspective
or something like
that?
Yeah,
from their perspective, it would be stuff that it's internal to them, and so being security minded, right? There's one thing to be like, okay, well, cool, like you just go handle it, and it'll be your problem. It's like, okay,
security lifecycle.
Yeah, we're being entrusted to do something on your behalf. Intrinsically, everybody knows that okay, you're handing some credentials because it's required to do it, and that requires some sensitive handling. How do you sensitively handle that stuff, and how do you do it without having to be a security expert yourself?
Yeah, which seems like more and more everyone kind of is. It's almost necessary for people to be a security expert.
On some dimension, yeah.
Or at least
it doesn't hurt, but it's a complex. It's a very, very complex space for sure. And we see some of these things that it just cracks me up. But the banks always crack me up. They're so far behind in their own technology. Many of them are still, even the big banks they're backed by these legacy mainframe systems from the 60s and 70s. And you probably had your own experience where it'll tell you your password has to be strong, but you can't use any of these special characters. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? Like, who's gonna guess this symbol? Yeah. And that is some kind of limitation in their
using instead of ASCII.
It's some other character set or something like that or something in their legacy system.
I didn't realize that was the reason those limitations. Because I've seen that before. I'm like, why can't I use these characters?
But they're like, hey, you can scan a check and deposit. I'm like, I don't need to scan a check. Figure out how to make my password strong.
I want better authentication here.
Yeah, I want better authentication.
I don't want someone to brute force.
Right? Yeah. I'm like, figure that out.
This dictionary attack.
Yeah. So. That stuff's amazing, and you would think you'd have more double down on that, but not so much. They've done a little bit to improve with some of the two-factor stuff, but
yeah, it's just helpful. I've heard that a lot of hospitals and insurance companies have been also really behind.
Oh yeah, really far behind. It's like finance and health all up. It's like amazing how far they're behind in it.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, they're some of our most vulnerable, infrastructure.
Finance, I'm somewhat surprised because there's so much more so many more common things, and it's kind of not. Maybe it's an overgeneralization, but I would consider it not that complicated. I mean, I worked in finance. I was in finance for a long time. Compared to health, health is way more complicated. No matter what it is, even in dentistry, right? So
all the communication.
And so it's the cost, right? So especially in medicine, unless you're like big HMO or something like that, right? If you're a dentist or you're like some general practitioner that's doing like you're working through PPO or something like that, it's like your little business, right? And so you need software, you need medical software to run your business.
Yeah.
But you're not a technology expert, right? So you're not going to build it. You're not going to pay for it to be built, right? Shouldn't this problem be solved? So you're literally buying something and then you're relying on it to be secure or to be flexible. And so there's a gazillion players out there, right? And because of the complexity in the medical field, particularly I think around like the data points that you have to collect and so forth, and it's so specific to each discipline, there isn't like an all-out solution.
So everything's tailored. Each one's being tailored, and there's all these small mom and pop more kind of companies, and there's larger ones and medium-sized businesses, all with different complexities.
Yeah, and the big ones, maybe they are adequate, but it's cost prohibitive to a small guy. They just can't afford it, right? Because even the companies, I've dabbled in consulting and throwing out some of that stuff to the medical field, and you can charge exorbitant amounts, and they'll pay because there aren't alternatives.
Yeah, it's monopolized.
It's not even like so much revenue. It's like there's nobody else doing it, and so their alternatives are like, well, we don't do it. We do it ourselves, which would be even more expensive, or we pay somebody else to do it.
Yeah, and also could have a huge risk because, I mean, even people that are security experts are finding vulnerabilities all the time. I just started. I got Feedly. It's this like free RSS thing on my phone, and I just started reading through it, and I mean, it's just daily CISA and CERT, just things come out all the time. All these SVEs, I think. I can't remember what. This vulnerabilities. Coming out from just the smallest things, and like some of them, like what we were talking about permissions, like it's just like the default is set this way, or this other one where the access denied for Samba share, and they just updated it, but if you did it twice, and then on a third time I think, then it would allow you to get into the root directory. Oh. And so it's like, okay, well, the workaround is like to make sure that there's no access to, it's not all, it's just only for, administrators, but it's pretty ridiculous how these
so private in there. I mean, compliance is also a big problem. That's another reason why you see companies up in there. So privacy compliance, like with HIPAA and stuff like that, is a big one, especially for medicine. Keeping it protected is also a challenge. I recently saw, and it was hilarious, talking about the amount of accidental release confidential or top secret information is on the rise because of technology itself. So you see all these things like where you have stuff that's redacted, and the way that people have been redacting, so commonly it might be something like a PDF or something like that, and the way that they're redacting it is by basically doing what you would have done physically, which would be like black marker over it. So they're putting like a black box over it or something, right? But what they don't understand, because they're not technically savvy enough, is you didn't actually remove anything. You just put like the black box over it. The actual text is still below it. So somebody who really understands like the technology and what they're doing actually can move it over. They can extract all the text. You haven't redacted anything.
And would that be by like looking at the actual code and then the plain text?
Well, so the text is literally just there. They're just layers, right? So visually you don't see it because one is layered on top of the other.
But as a PDF file, you could just extract.
Exactly. The text is all there, right? So that's actually happened a number of different times on things.
Wow. That's bad.
You're like, oops. But it's not something you know,
Twitter,
you kind of, you don't really like, it doesn't really occur to you that like, oh, wow, there's all this stuff in there. Like, oh, I
can't see it.
Yeah, my eyes can't see it, so it's not there. No, it's there.
That's the thing that's so trippy about technology. I mean, there's so many nuances and clever ways that things have been put together that this, the general public's not privy to at all.
Yeah.
And it's not like you can train people up on that. You can't just be like, oh yeah, spend a couple, 5-10 years just studying this on top of your life. Like, you just can't do that unless you're in the field, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean, it's in some ways it's actually not that dissimilar to how it was. Sometimes with the black markers weren't dark enough, right? You can, if it was done with like a typewriter or something, you kind of hold it up to light. You could still kind of see. There's always
been people sneaky that if it's like, oh, the default password, it probably hasn't been changed. Like just really simple things like that too. So how many different hats do you wear? What are the hats?
Oh, from an engineering perspective?
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I never really tried to quantify it that way. I've touched all kinds of different stuff.
What's your favorite that you've engaged in?
So I've probably spent close to the last 15 years probably working a bunch with services and really knowing web-based protocols, right? Like how do you building services over the internet and stuff like that. So it's So a lot of people do web pages and stuff like that. The underlying protocols, HTTP, I live and breathe it. I mean,
is that UX is what I think they're calling it nowadays?
Well, so UX is more of there's the experience. People love to say UI versus and UX. So the user interface is literally the interface that you see. The experience is sort of the experience that you have, the flow that you go through. That's
the delineation.
Some people try to sort of conflate them that they're the same thing, but they're actually quite different in different disciplines.
It's like the UX of Facebook is so addictive, right? Is that kind of
there's something about it like a flow or trying to get your specific attention or things that go into marketing and stuff like that, like the flow, the user friendliness that if you right.
Yes.
Versus just the UI itself is the thing that you interact with, which
kind of this is very obscure. Doherty's threshold. I don't know if that's a real thing. I heard it had to do with applications being able to respond with under 400 milliseconds.
Oh yeah, sure. Response time. That's purely about how human nature, right? Because people get bored. Well, they just get bored and stuff. I mean, that's been a huge stuff with even in challenges with organic search engines, right? If you don't show up in the first couple of pages, the chances of you being found or going through exponentially goes down. I mean, think about how many times you actually end up on even the 5th page, right? It's page 1, maybe you go to page 2, maybe you go to page 3, but by the 4th or 5th page, you're probably you almost probably never go past the 5th page. I mean, it's
especially when you see 100, 1,000.
Yeah,
it's no.
Yeah, exactly. One of 100,000 results. You're yeah, exactly. So
that's so. But what was your favorite? I know you've had 20 plus years of experience.
Oh, gosh, there's been so many interesting. It's kind of it's sort of like music. It's just kind of always recycling. There's always just something new. You're not really. It's constantly evolving. You constantly have to learn something new.
Just gotta stay abreast.
Yeah, in some ways you're seeing, I think, a little bit more sort of interoperability and so forth, but it's a real challenge between innovation, competition, and then just usability or practicality, right? Everybody needs, the phone is a staple of life now, right? And there's basic things the phone needs to be able to do, make a phone call, and we expect to do things like text message and play music and check email and so forth, but they're still radically different, right? Even laptops and so forth, right? They're radically different systems. They have similar functionality, but they don't actually have this
not common the same hardware.
Not the same hardware. In some cases, not even the same software, right? There's there are significant differences.
Android, you have Windows, you got Linux, you have Unix, you have all kinds of shit.
Yeah, and those things happen, and it's in some ways it's funny how early decisions have impacted like the way things have grown. The Windows Unix landscape's always interesting, right? At the most fundamental level, you could boil it down to just saying like, well, at the end of the day, they're totally incompatible because one system says I read the binary left to right, and the other one says I read it right to left.
So that's how
they call that the Indianness, Endian, Indianness, because it's which end you're reading from.
Oh shit! Okay, yeah.
But so the reality is that, the binary is the binary, but how it's read depends on which direction you read it from, and it has significant differences. But that's the most fundamental difference, and these assumptions are made, all the way down into hardware as optimizations, and so that fundamentally makes things incompatible, because it could mean something completely different depending on which way you're reading it from. And so there's been lots of attempts to try to mitigate that, and like how do we have designs that aren't limited to that, and to some degree we've succeeded, but those type of things still exist, and so I find it interesting that you would think that somebody would have just decided a long time ago, like let's just pick one and everyone's gonna do it.
Like the IETF.
Yeah.
Would be like, all right, guys.
Yeah.
Is there an IETF for operating systems? Like some type of engineering task force.
Not really. Not really.
That would help a lot.
I mean, the only thing that we're really starting, I think you're starting to really see sort of Linux in particular come back strong into the fold. Not because it's free or because of anything else. It's literally just so many eyes have been on it, right?
Yeah. Open source is a hell of a thing.
So, I mean, open source certainly has pros and cons, but certainly the biggest pro is thousands upon thousands upon thousands of eyes have seen it and fixed things. Whereas some of the more closed things like, Windows, because it's proprietary, just doesn't have the same level of scrutiny because people have not actually seen it.
There's only so many employees that you can have.
People retire and all these type of things, right? Over time, it's just lost. So that's an interesting thing. So maybe there will be some kind of convergence. I mean, that's basically more or less what Apple's done, right? I mean, they have iOS, but basically, Mac is effectively running like Unix, Linux these days. It's not really like Mac anymore. Yeah, not the traditional sense.
And see, I didn't realize that it had to do with the binary. I just thought it was NTFS versus whatever. So
file system encoding is certainly one aspect of having it compatible, but basically the processing of the way the machine works is really what ultimately decides that.
It's the bytecode, really.
Yeah, it's not even beyond that. Just truly the binary. Like, how is the system going to actually process it? And this is the same type of problems that we have with architectures, right? 32 versus 64 versus the older 16 and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the systems make assumptions about, right? Those are the size of the registers.
That's the word length, right?
Yeah, and that affects, right? There's hard assumptions about how that works. And someday we're probably going to go to 128-bit or whatever the next thing is, and like, what is that going to mean?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that will be sort of interesting, but I don't know. Maybe there'll be a convergence someday. But I've always kind of just as a consumer myself, I'm like, why do I have to have all these different things?
Yeah, it just seems silly. Like with HDMI is great. It's a great cable. And it has audio and video together, and it's very standardized. And DisplayPort's similar, but there's been so many things. But
why did DisplayPort become successful?
Yeah. Why is there two different things that are kind of competing?
So for a very interesting reason. So I actually know the story because I went and looked it up. I thought I'm like,
enlighten me.
I know. So I don't remember who the players are. So HDMI is controlled by a consortium of like 3 or 4 big companies. I don't remember all the company names. And so they were definitely one of the first to sort of have this one cable does all. But they charge licensing fees to use it. Right, so in order to put an HDMI port on there, right, there's some licensing fee you have to pay for every
company.
Or the consortium. I don't know how that divvies out.
Like if you want to put it on your machine.
Yeah, you want it on your TV, you got to put it. You want to put it on your receiver, you got to pay this fee. And this is pretty common for lots of different. I mean, this happens in technology all the time. I mean, we do this. Yeah. Then there were some other challenges, right? Then they have the different form factors, right? So you have the full HDMI, you have the mini HDMI, and you have the micro. And they're all different. They actually don't all have the exact same specs. So they're not just different sizes, they also have different specs. Like about their capabilities and what they can do.
Okay. So
DisplayPort is a different group, and one of the things they wanted, in addition to expanding upon what was possible technology-wise, it's royalty free, so you don't have to pay anything.
Much more incentive.
So this is why you saw a huge spike in DisplayPort. DisplayPort also, regardless of size, and I think they only actually have two sizes. DisplayPort is DisplayPort, doesn't matter the size. So the mini DisplayPort has the exact same capabilities as the larger DisplayPort.
So when you say like capabilities and specs, you mean
like there's
96 or 10?
So it has to do with like the resolution and the current that goes through, right?
Oh wow! So
because current affects refresh rate, right? So the amount that you can put through. There's also different types of signals, right? So I think for like if you wanted to do 3D over HDMI, I believe it had to be like 1.2 or above or something like that. I don't remember.
That's the iteration of the HDMI.
Yeah, like the spec in order to be able to push like a 3D image over the cable.
Because it's a higher current, probably.
Or whatever the requirements. Well, which would effectively make sense, right? So encoding over signals is modulation, right? It's where modem comes from. It's modulate, demodulate.
Right. Yeah.
So modem's the contraction of that, and so modulation is then encoding. So frequency is basically the peaks, right, in the signal, and that's how you do encoding. That's how wireless works.
Yeah.
Right. So higher frequency means more peaks, which means you can pack more data.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna.
Time.
So a higher frequency in the cable should mean that you can pack more information in there.
And hence 3D would be easier. Okay.
Right. That's right. 3D is going to require more information.
Yes. Yeah.
Or it's going to depend also on like the encoding scheme, right? It's
going
to be based upon
code.
Yeah, a more efficient encoding scheme, right? Can do that.
Which everyone's trying to push for, but. And it's sad because I feel like I've heard this. I heard this through school too. That a lot of the problems today isn't the fact like the computers are really fast, but people are getting more lazy with the way they're coding. I don't know. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. Just like we were talking in music, right? The barrier to entry, it used to be a lot harder. The skill level required to do any type of coding used to be so much higher.
High math.
Not just high math, and the skill in order to get there was so much higher, right? You had to know so much more things, and trying to address some of those problems, like memory management. Like again, if I'm trying to build a website, why do I want to spend time trying to figure out like how do I optimize memory management in a computer, right? Like that's an inefficient use of time, and there's almost no ROI to that. To like getting my product out there or making money. And so the improvements in computer science have really been like, okay, how do we reduce that down? But then with that has the side effect of that is then that has allowed you to not just go faster, but it then lowered the bar, and you can have less skilled workers come in. And so then that, that's the trade-off.
Yeah, just clunky code.
So you can
look pretty on the front end, but it's like just slow and shitty.
Yeah. There's a disconnect between skill levels between people doing it and people overseeing it. Even managers in technology, right? They're so busy. They may not know because sort of it's constantly changing, and they've been sort of out of the game for a while, or they're just so out of that loop. Like they spend all their day writing emails and like going to meetings, and like they're not really like looking over, like really overseeing it.
Yeah, you can't micromanage.
Exactly.
They don't want to. Yeah, I mean, and in politics, there's so many different nuances to it.
So that comes, that introduces sort of all those different types of challenges. But yeah, certainly in the U.S., like where we have, we're in a crisis of engineers. People like, oh yeah, we have a shortage of doctors. We have a gross shortage of engineers.
It's an ever expanding field too. There's people that are leaving.
The industry is expanding, the demand is expanding, and there just simply are not enough. That's why you see so many people coming over on visas. It's not coming over because, just to make money. There's of course, yeah, people want to do it. It's like there's nobody to fill these jobs.
Because STEM isn't harped upon that much here in America, but other places maybe it's more, rigorous.
I mean, they're coming as the opportunity. So I mean, the U.S. is looking at like, hey, I need more engineers, and there simply are not enough engineers, and there are not enough. There's different areas. One, sometimes you just need bodies, and then sometimes you need really skilled engineers. So, you'll see the really, really skilled engineers coming out, and they're sort of more of those one-off specialized type jobs. But there's so much more work to be done, and there just physically aren't enough of them. We talk about what
overhauls.
Oh, well, there's a transition, right? I mean, I've seen some, right? People talk, oh, yeah, we got to get rid of, the coal factories. What do we do with it? I mean, that's what economics is trying to teach us, is that, we're supposed to have this transition of, like, moving away from blue collar to white collar, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be...
Yeah, automation, technology.
But it's, there's a challenge. There are some people who simply don't want to do it for a variety of reasons. They're stubborn, maybe they're lazy... Or maybe they're sort of at the end, right? Like, maybe they're at retirement age. Like, I got 5 more years to go, but I want to start over.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's that. But then there are people who do want to do it, right? I mean, I've seen some of these. There's some programs in places where, like, yeah, I used to be a coal miner, but now I'm studying to design web pages. I mean, that's awesome. Like that's the type of stuff that we actually need.
Yeah.
You need more of those, but definitely like skilled engineer, and I still don't see it coming out of you look at compared to some other countries, like their kids are starting it like way early. It's you're introduced to it young. You're doing it like in high school, and
which I'm surprised we don't promote that kind of education.
We just don't do it enough. Yeah,
it seems like we have a very low bar for social in social groups. Intellectual prowess is still not very, very valuable.
I think we take advantage of it. There's just not kids in particular, not like the curiosity is lost. Like if you take it away, they'll know about it and they're freak out. But like no curiosity, like how does it work? You see these kids like, oh yeah, Dad, the internet's broken. Really? The internet is broken. Really?
The entire wide area network.
Yes. Nobody can use the internet anymore. Yeah.
It's not your land.
No. Yeah. Like, what exactly does that mean? Oh, yes, your wireless connection is slow or broken.
What's crazy is it's so easy now too, because maybe it's always been this easy, but you literally just pull up a browser, type in whatever the IP address for your specific router, and you can just log in there and just look at it and see what's going on. Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff that you can see there, but yeah, I just think that's the loss, like that curiosity. I mean, me, I don't know. I guess that's why I like it. I like puzzles. I like taking stuff apart. I don't know. I was a Lego guy. Build. Take it apart, put it together, build stuff, and
hell yeah.
And puzzles, and I guess that's my attraction to it. But there's some people who don't care how it works. Like, I just want it to work.
Yeah, I've never understood that either. I mean, it just seems like a kind of limited way to live your life. I understand, hedonism and having fun, that's a great thing. You should always enjoy life, but, isn't part of the enjoyment puzzles, the new things that you didn't know, and just, that's why science is so dope, because you're revealing so much.
We do that in so many places. When I spent time in finance, you see the same thing, right? It was sort of like a self-actualization, right? You think about, you put your money in a bank. Why do you put your money in the bank? Well, I want to keep it safe. Okay, safe from what? Okay, maybe under my mattress is not a good idea. Okay, So I'm going to put it in the bank. And then if I put it like in, I don't know, a passport checking account or a savings account, they're paying me some interest. Now wait, your job is to hold my money, but you're going to give me some extra money for just holding my money. Now how does that work? Yeah, why are you doing that? Like, how does that work? So that's the same kind of thing, right? Like, people don't stop and think about them. Don't stop and think about those type of things. Like, yes, there is a reason why they're doing that.
It's because you're loaning them the money.
Basically, yeah. In some sense, yeah, you could totally see that.
We're living in like a Wally world in a lot of ways. Here, at least.
Yeah, exactly, right. Just totally checked out. I'm sitting in my thing, and I got my cooler, and I'm getting fat with my wheelchair.
My tiny little bone structure.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
God, yeah.
That totally happens.
And then automation is making it easier for people to fall into those complacencies.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, you see like things that are being removed and people being scared about being replaced by automation. I mean, like, okay, well, whatever you're doing was perhaps honorable or noteworthy, but like we should move on. Like, you know what, like, maybe we don't need to have like truck drivers going like 12 hours a day. I mean, it's
backbreaking work. Yeah, I mean, it's
exactly
great to honor that and all the work that we've done to get there. But I mean, you don't see people. We have stoves. Like, we don't have even wood oven stoves anymore. Like, there's so many things that are just they're deprecated. They're not in use anymore. Not because they're not useful, but because we found more efficient ways.
Exactly. So no reason not to not do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I wish that there was a way that we could just make our education system better. It's such a general way of saying it, but
yeah,
something.
I mean, the strongest thing that I would say, well, certainly, the post-secondary where people sort of go into college, there definitely is a little bit of difference because most of the American schools you're forced to have a more well-rounded sort of education than you might in some other parts of the world. So like you won't specialize as deep, right? So, and I've certainly seen that come to fruition in ways that I would have never expected. So for example, like, I had to do like operations management in school. I'm like, I'm an engineer. Why do I need to know anything about operations? Why do I need to know about supply chain and inventory control? And then I worked with some software that was in that space. And it was really interesting to like, it was useful because I understood like, yeah, this is how these things work. For example, talking about how Walmart does it, having serialized inventory. Well, I've worked with some guys that came, were educated in other countries, and they thought that serialized inventory meant it had a serial number. Well, yes, the product does have a serial number, but that's not what that means, right? It's you're
a different concept.
You're tracking the life cycle of a product, right? I mean, my first exposure to that was consulting with like a mattress company, right? You don't track sheets and pillowcases, right? There's just too many. It's like not worth it. But you do track a bed, right? Because it costs a lot of money. But why does it cost a lot of money? It's actually not the material cost of it. How often do you buy a bed?
It's because of the frequency,
right? You buy a bed like maybe once every 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the last bed I had I've had for 12 plus years, right?
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't need anyone.
Depending on like how good they are.
Yeah, it's an awesome bed. Don't need another one. So figuring that into a business model, you got to factor that like, hey, people aren't going to buy.
So we have to charge them more.
I mean, look at light bulbs, right? What 2 of the 3 Edison bulbs are still on in the Smithsonian. So clearly, we can make a light bulb that will last a really long time.
But it's not a good idea. We want to make it to break sometimes.
There's a couple of different things. One, how they obviously like the luminosity makes a factor, right? So those are pretty dull bulbs in comparison. These are much brighter. Yeah. Brighter means hotter. It wears out faster. But then there's the economics of it. Like, okay, why would I want to sell you a bulb that lasts forever? And you sort of now have seen the resurgence. If you look at like these LED bulbs, if you ever go try to buy one, you'll see they're ridiculously expensive. Why are they expensive? The materials are cheap. LED is an old technology, and it's super cheap, but they last a really long time.
So they need their ROI.
Exactly. You gotta factor that in.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's the thing. Like a lot of people, hate on capitalism, and I totally understand it. But I think it comes from a misunderstanding of how our economy drives itself forward, how we get all the wonderful little devices that we have that make life convenient.
Yeah, I think that arises most common in like medicine. Medicine, I think, is interesting, right? So a lot of people are like, oh, we got to have more. We should have like socialized medicine or something, and like look how it works. Look how it's worked in these other countries. Maybe, I don't profess to be an expert in the medical field, but certainly if you consider, like, where have a large percentage of medical advances come from? Well, the U.S. is certainly a place. Does that mean it's because we have smarter people? No, it's because they're financially motivated to figure it out.
Yeah, selfishness. It's not something to be hated upon.
But I mean, it also it's a double-edged sword, because then you've seen some of these, like, right, this douchebag that had like the EpiPen and stuff like that, right? Where just
who invented it, or
well, he ended up with like the rights to the patent, and then increased the price by like 2,000% or something.
Something that's life-saving. Yeah,
that made it ridiculous.
Because anyone can suffer from that. Any part of the strata of financial.
Sure. I mean, and there's been a lot of like sort of conspiracy debates of like, oh, do we have the technology to eradicate AIDS today? I don't know, maybe, but where's the money in that, right? There's basically
maybe it's a huge market.
There's money to be exactly. So like I said, there's a dark side of like, well, I'll make you well enough.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a double.
Keep coming back.
So you need to keep coming back. It's a double-edged sword, but I don't know. I don't know if there are right answers, but certainly you're less motivated to do it if there isn't going to be like financial gain from it.
Yeah, if you don't get a commission in some form or another, even if it's not a direct commission, if there's some extra value that you can bring to yourself. But you're right. It is such a double-edged sword. It's a balance between motivating people, but not letting them get too out of control and making crazy monopolies that you see in different places.
We're just being socially irresponsible. I think we're seeing that. We're seeing some accounting being held with all this crazy opioid stuff, right? It's the same type of stuff, right? The companies are being held from. I think I just saw that like whatever the company has, OxyContin's like the verge of bankruptcy.
That's a company too. Oxycodone is some type of opiate.
Yeah.
I know it's an opiate. I just didn't. I thought that's what it was called, oxycodone.
Yeah. So it's you see that coming, and is that going to help?
Yeah, we're just gonna have people that are addicted and dying from their withdrawals. What's gonna be the fallout from that? Yeah, it's a crazy world, and it's funny because, well, maybe not funny. It's interesting to note that something could start from a good place, and then just snowball into something just tyrannical so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, some of those they're motivated also by what possibilities there actually are, right? So if you can, what other things have been imposed limited the market by like the government. So like, okay, because of where marijuana is, for example, on the federal illegal substance schedule, there's not really a lot of formal research in there. Well, but some of these opioids are allowed. So like, well, you've basically given me like sort of a half-assed toolbox to work with here. You want me to come up with like invent better painkillers or things that like to help people, but I only have like a screwdriver and a hammer. That's all I have. I
need something to scrape it. I need the finer.
I need something to grab this with.
Tool.
Yeah, exactly.
So many different things.
So what do you do? And people have been championing that for so marijuana's one. Mushrooms have been another, like psilocybin. There's been some pretty interesting things with that, with people who have migraines migraines. I've seen stuff like schizophrenia, like some random stuff that you wouldn't even expect it. Yeah,
drug addiction. I think I've heard too.
So, and I think marijuana in particular is maybe helping sort of drive them like, okay, yeah, maybe we should be reconsidering it. You know, MDMA has been another one where there's been some great recent breakthroughs with you know, PTSD and stuff like that, where there's been a lot of push, like, yeah, we need to be able to do research here.
Yeah, I mean, they're pharmaceuticals in a way. I mean, we just don't necessarily call them that. But they're all drugs are drugs. They're drugs.
And they all carry the same, you know, just about anything can carry a risk. And there's things with physical addictive properties, and there's just some of it's also just people. I mean, I've known my fair share of friends or other people that are, there's just some people have a proclivity to that, right? You know,
yeah,
they're OCD or whatever, right? It's just like they go all in,
and then also,
there's no moderation.
Yeah, there's that, and there's also, I think, depression too, and like being socially isolating yourself can do that, because I mean, this is just I think this was a blog I read, but it was about like studies on rats, and they like had isolated rats, and then they did another one where it was like a playground and they were together, and they had the same opportunity to take drugs, some type of drug, I don't know if it was opiates or what, in a liquid form, I think, and the ones that were isolated were just on it all the time. The ones that weren't wouldn't really do it as much.
That's crazy.
I don't know the validity of this test. I mean, it's just like an article I read.
No, but I mean, certainly for humans, you can start to see that. It could be depression. You can just bored.
Yeah.
Right.
Or
like
not being able to.
Like, how can I entertain myself? Oh, you push that in front of me. Sure.
Which is interesting, because it kind of goes back to our what we were talking about with education standards and thinking and not wanting to progress mentally, which a lot of people seem to just get stuck in that for whatever reason. They're too into enjoying themselves, maybe too. I'm trying to think of that one Greek god's name, the guy who's always on wine and stuff. They're too Dionysian.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I mean that's the state of things sometimes. Which is really interesting that we do have all these people that are coming from other countries and just at very young ages being able to swipe away the competition.
Yeah.
But I mean, America is founded on people that are from everywhere, so it's pretty American.
I guess so.
Is there anything else that you want to like cover on and talk about?
Man, no, we went all over the spectrum now.
Yeah, covered it all.
Yeah, that was like almost like a trip down like memory lane for a second too.
That's awesome.
Like kind of going back and sort of recollecting all those years, and man, still doing it. I'm actually surprised. Like another, you know, being up here from California, it's still a lot of guys I know they're still doing it in some form or another, and I think
music scene.
Still doing it, still do their little local thing, whatever. They're doing their little club scene, or they're doing park parties. I wish I saw more of that up here. That's one thing that we used to do. I used to love doing that summer. We would go do like park parties. I worked with a lot of different guys that were some were promoters that switched to become like DJs, so they have like that experience. And I sort of missed those. You know, you legitimately go get like permits and stuff, and it wasn't, you know. Yeah, and you go out and you just like have a barbecue and you bring out a generator and some decks and you got like music,
awesome,
right? I've been trying to like rally some people. It seems like we could only ever make it happen like on the east side. I don't know, something like Marymore or something like that. It'd be great to do that, like something a day, like a 10 to 10. Like it doesn't not everything has to be at night. But Seattle's made it so. I know I have a couple people I've talked to. Seattle itself has made it so hard. I mean, they basically have sent a message like, we don't want you here.
Permit wise?
So you can get it. So apparently, like, it's not horrible to get a permit. It's still a few $100s. But I was talking to one guy though. They require you to carry like $1 million like liability policy.
What?
Yeah, which is like, you know, for a day it was like a couple $1,000.
I mean that's
which is ridiculous.
You know,
I mean, I can understand sort of some level of concern, but
people don't want people.
It's not like it's not like we're at night. It's not like, you know, you're showing up with like, you know, booze and all this. It's actually funny. Apparently, it's not even that hard to get like a booze license. Like you can get like a booze license. You can get like, you know, the sound permit. It's the liability that they really try to screw you over on.
I mean, because what are they worried that someone's going to sue and be like, oh, I was on this property and it's the state's fault, city's fault, something like that.
I mean, people are going to do that anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
people are going to be assholes.
Yeah, there's just complete lack of accountability on people, and
Yes.
There's probably some other experiences that maybe have caused that. I don't know, but yeah, that certainly disgusts me about this country these days. I mean, if you were to go to like, if you were in, you know, some European country and you walked down the street and you stepped in a manhole, you know, people are like, hey idiot, watch where you're going. Yeah, watch where you're going. And like here it's like, oh no, I gotta see, you should have had like a sign there and it should have had blinking flashing lights and like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like,
that's
exactly.
the point. You have to be accountable to yourself. You have to take self-agency. If you don't, what are you doing in life? You're just standing still.
So yeah. So but yeah, so I miss that. I don't know. Maybe that will sort of manifest at some point. That would be kind of cool.
I hope so. I hope people will take more responsibility for their lives. You know, it's sad seeing people wither away when they have so much potential. I mean, the human vessel is immensely emergent. So there's so much that can come out of it.
Yep, definitely. But yeah, I don't know on that. I don't know.
Parks, alright, cool.
Yeah, so yeah. Love to see that come back. I don't know. It's probably the last fun thing. Yeah, seeing that riverfront was like a throwback to camping with generators. But those were the days. I miss those days for sure.
You can get some organized. That'd be really cool. Let me know.
Yeah. You know, I guess we're at the end of this season, but yeah, maybe next year get sort of come up. Yeah, I was excited to see that there was like, you know, Decibel festivals going, and that sort of fizzled out. Like dude moved to LA or whatever, and that made me sad because that was kind of like a nice little gem that we had here. That I think some people are trying to kind of. Yeah, the Decibel festival. So they're doing that for years here.
But is it just like in downtown?
Yeah, it was like they would do it for like 5 days. It would sort of start like Wednesday night.
Kind of like Hemp Fest or Focalize.
Yeah. But it wasn't like they really didn't do anything too big except for, I think, the conclusion usually they did do something big in a park. I think the last big one they did was right down by like the Space Needle. But then I guess like the main guy that like was, you know, coordinating and promoting it, he moved to LA. I don't know the exact details. And some people have tried to pick it up. Like, you know, they tried to do a Crim Fest last year. You know, Crimworks was trying to do that, and
Crimworks.
Yeah, but that was. I mean, they brought some big talent. But I mean, it was like one place. Like, it wasn't really like fanned out like previous years. I mean, that's what you were getting people coming from all over the place. Yeah, actually, a guy that used to collect a lot of his records came out. Brian Zintz on one of the years, man. I forgot where he moved. He was actually at the time was living in like Virginia, and yeah, I'd collected his records for years, and I'd never seen him, and that was kind of cool to see some you know, moderately big names kind of come out. And there were people people were coming from like Colorado and like kind of all. I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool.
That is pretty. So just like,
but there were
outer state areas and
yeah, and a lot of them were just like, you know, much sort of smaller DJs and producers. Not a lot of huge names would come out, which was kind of cool. Like there might be a few recognizable names, but a lot of just sort of like mix up, just having a, you know, festival with local and other sort of broader range of people. So
that's awesome.
I'd love to see that occur.
Hopefully, I mean, are you planning on trying to organize something like that? Kind of like
yeah, you know, I finally got a couple of other people. It's really hard to do by yourself.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, and I'm like, man, like I don't think there's any way I could do it by myself. But I mean, I probably could. I don't know if I have the stamina to do that anymore. But I definitely had some people recently that are eager to sort of go back and do that type of stuff. So maybe that'll start to plan out for, you know, this next year. Get some events going.
That would be sick. I'd love to attend something like that.
Oh, definitely. We'll get when something happens, you'll know about it. We'll get it out
on
there.
horn. Yeah. All right. Cool. Well, I guess not much more. So we'll just wrap it up.
Yep.
All right. Well, this has been the MindLink Frequency. I'm here with Chris Martinez, and have a great day, everybody.